I just made the Halloween costume of my dreams, and I honestly can't believe how fun it was. I'm Whitney from Sugar and Sparrow, and if there's one thing that you need to know about me, it's that I'm obsessed with cake. And if that's you too, or you simply want a fun and creative costume project, I'm going to show you how I made this one with foam board and lots of spackle. I'm usually on here posting actual cake recipes and cake decorating tutorials, so if you're into that, now is a good time to subscribe to my channel. To start this costume, you'll need a plan. I have a blog post that details how I measured the dimensions of this costume, and it's linked in the video description below. Once you have those dimensions for the height and diameter of each tier, it's time to measure and cut the pieces out of foam board. I started with the very top opening piece, which is basically a circle inside a smaller circle, and it's really important that the smaller circle is the diameter you want for your opening. I will confess that I made mine just barely big enough to wiggle into, and if I had to do it all over again, I would have added an inch to the diameter for more wiggle room, so keep that in mind. I cut this piece out with an X-Acto knife, but soon after I realized that a cardboard cutter is much easier to maneuver and more efficient, so grab one of those if you have it. I repeated the process of drawing and cutting the same piece, only slightly larger, for the bottom tier of this cake costume. So all in all, you'll have two of these circular pieces, the smaller one for the top of the costume, the larger one for the top of the bottom tier. Next, I got to work on the sides of each cake tier. I measured and marked out the height that I wanted the top tier to be, and then cut out enough length to equal the circumference of that tier and scored it with an X-Acto knife. Scoring basically means you're making slices every quarter inch or so that don't go all the way through the foam board. I just kind of eyeballed this process. In the end, scoring these pieces makes them more flexible so you can create a cylindrical shape. Once I had my pieces cut out, I used my hot glue gun to glue them together. I also grabbed some bookbinding tape to seal up the seams and just reinforce the structure. After repeating this process with the bottom tier, I ended up with the perfect cake shape for my costume, and I glued those tiers together with more hot glue. I've been making costumes for my whole family this year, and I swear the hot glue gun is the star of the show. I'm kind of in love with it. Now that the structure of the costume is built, it's time for frosting. I used a lightweight spackle for this and tinted it pink with some RIT dye, and the color here is called Rose Quartz. This works surprisingly well, and I can't believe how much the spackle behaved like real frosting, and honestly maybe even easier to work with. I applied the spackle to the cake with an angled spatula and worked one tier at a time so that it didn't dry out while I was frosting. It would honestly look pretty cool with a textured finish, so feel free to follow your heart with that, but I wanted to see if I could create a smooth finish. So I went around with an icing smoother and I got it smooth enough for my liking, following the same techniques that I would with a real cake. By the way, if you struggle with getting smooth buttercream on your actual cakes, I do have a tutorial for how to create a smooth buttercream finish that details all my favorite techniques and hacks to make the process super quick and easy. Check that out at the link in the video description below if you need it. After frosting the whole cake costume, you'll want to let it air dry for 24 to 48 hours until it's firm to the touch. At this point, it's time to decorate the cake. I wanted to create a vintage aesthetic for my cake costume, so I marked out relatively equal sections using a straight edge. In hindsight, I would probably use a pencil instead of my 5-year-old's Crayola markers, but I'll remember that for next time. When I had the sections marked out, I used my hot glue gun to glue on some yarn swags. This is just thick white yarn that I picked up at the craft store, and I pre-cut the different lengths before gluing them all on. I added swags to the top and bottom tiers, then tinted some of the leftover pink spackle with a little bit of red acrylic paint to make a darker pink. I found that the paint worked just as well as the RIT dye to tint the spackle. I added the dark pink spackle into a piping bag fitted with Wilton Tip 6B and started piping a shell border on the bottom of the top tier. I quickly realized that the spackle alone is super thick. almost too thick to pipe well. So I did my best on this section and then ended up adding a little bit of water to thin the rest of the spackle into a more pipeable consistency. This worked great. Look at how much easier it pipes along the top edge after I mix some water in. It's important to only add about 1 to 2 teaspoons of water at a time because I did make the mistake of adding too much water and made the spackle too soupy to pipe with, and it couldn't be saved. So be careful when you add any water. After piping the pink shell borders, I used some of the watered down white spackle to pipe more shell borders with Wilton Tip 4B. I piped these shell borders next to each pink shell border, and then I piped some little star designs underneath where each yarn swag connects. Finally, I piped a large pink shell to connect each yarn swag. I was so giddy when I stepped back and saw it all finished. Just look at this thing. It's the biggest tiered cake I've ever made thus far. I let the decorated cake dry for a few days, and honestly some of the thicker shell borders can take up to a week to fully dry. So keep that in mind for your costume timeline. Once it's dry, it's time to attach the straps. I used nylon webbing that I found on Amazon, which is basically the same material you would use for tote bag straps. I attached the straps with hot glue and then reinforced the glue portion with bookbinding tape. I was honestly a little skeptical that this would be strong enough, but it worked incredibly well when I tried it on. See what I mean about having to wiggle into that opening? Be sure to add an extra inch for wiggle room. I'm so happy it fit because look at how cute this cake costume is. I paired it with a frilly vintage top and a headband that I piped with some spackle to tie the look together, and I cannot wait to wear it again for Halloween. Let me know what you think, and if you make it, in the comments below. I'd love to see how you decorate your cake costume. For more actual cake decorating tutorials and recipes, head to my blog at sugarandsparrow.com to find inspiration for your next baking project. You'll also find lots of recipe videos and tutorials on my YouTube channel here. Hit the subscribe button while you're here so you never miss a new video from me. Thanks for watching!